Beautiful. The Visiting Artist Program, funded by PAFA's graduate program, brings an outstanding roster of local, national, and international artists to PAFA each semester for lectures, critiques, and workshops. The program exposes students and the public to a range of artistic approaches and fosters discussion about contemporary art and ideas. This evening, we are pleased to have Amir Fallah joining us today. Amir Fallah creates paintings, sculptures, and installations that utilize personal history as an entry point to discuss race, representation, the body, and the memories of cultures and countries left behind. Fallah wryly incorporates Western art historical references into paintings formally rooted in the pattern-based visual language of Islamic art. Fallah received his BFA in Fine Art and Painting at the Maryland Institute College of Art and his MFA in Painting at the University of California, Los Angeles. He has exhibited extensively in solo and group exhibitions across the United States and abroad, including the Museum of Contemporary Art in Tucson, the South Dakota Art Museum, the Schneider Museum of Art, and the Nerman Museum of Contemporary Art in Kansas. So please help me give a warm welcome to Amir. You may now begin sharing your screen.
Hi, everybody. Hope you're all well. All right, let's see. Can everybody see that? Yeah, okay. So it's kind of strange because can you guys also see a picture of me while you're seeing the screen or just the screen? Yeah, okay. It's just kind of meta. I just realized it's my background. We're looking at my background. It's kind of strange. Anyways, thanks for being here, and just add any questions you have to the little chat box. So all of my work essentially deals with portraiture, the history of portraiture, how to deconstruct portraiture, expand upon it, and abstract it at times, and kind of try to breathe new life into it. I'll just start by just showing some fairly recent work from a couple of years ago. So in all of my work, you don't see the person's likeness. So for the last 6 or 7 years, I've been doing these kind of veiled portraits where you don't see what the figure is, what the figure's physical features are. Sometimes you can't tell if they're male or female, if they're young or old, or if they're attractive or not. You don't see their tattoos, or if their ears are pierced. All of those things are removed. And there's always just kind of these veiled figures with various objects, sometimes furniture, sometimes plant life surrounding them. And the process to make these works came about one day when my wife and I were sitting in our home, and we had come back from a big trip, and my wife was sitting on the ground folding laundry. We were folding it together, and then I walked out of the room, and when I walked back in, just at the perspective of the angle that I was at, I could not see her torso. All I could see were her hands and her feet kind of like sticking out from behind this image. And oops, did I just come out of the thing? Sorry. And so, I pulled out my phone and I just took a quick photograph of her, and I kept that in my studio for a while and started thinking about, this image that essentially was a portrait of my wife, but you couldn't see any of the things that you associate with her physical likeness. So I couldn't see that she was a redhead, that she had freckles. You just see her hands and feet, and then you saw these clothes. And what was interesting about the pile of clothes was that I could it still felt like a portrait of her because there was like a blouse that had a pattern that I associated with a trip that we took. And then there was a shirt that I had bought her. So the clothes became a way of identifying who she was. And so after living with that photo for a while, I came up with this idea of, doing these veiled portraits where I go to somebody's home and almost do an archaeological dig of their lives. And, we walk from room to room and I photograph different belongings. So like, we might, I might go into the living room, and on the couch there would be a pillow, and on that pillow would be it would be a needlepoint pillow, and I would ask them about that pillow, and it would come out that that pillow belonged to their great grandmother, and it was passed down, and it was something that she grew up with, and when she moved out, she kept. So these everyday mundane objects became a way to describe who their family is, talk about their history, and really learn more about them. So with all my subjects, I would go through this process with them in their homes, photograph everything, and then create a still life of sorts in their living room or bedroom. And then I would always cover their faces. So what you see in these paintings, these are real things that actually exist in real life. Every object in these paintings belongs to the subject. Like the objects that these two figures are holding in their hands, the big vases on each side, the carpet, everything's from a real place. And then so I would always cover the person's face and take a series of photographs and then bring that imagery back to my studio and then construct a painting. So there was this research phase of every painting, and then in the studio there would be the process of actually making it. And I work off of digital mock-ups. So I'll take the photographs, I'll put them in Photoshop, splice them together, and then take that image, depending on the size, project it, do a quick contour drawing off that projection, and then start painting by hand. So that's generally been the process of creating most of the paintings for about 7-8 years now. So now I'll go into some projects at various exhibition spaces. So the Caretaker, this is a solo show at the Nerman Museum of Art in 2015. And I was friends with the director just really on Facebook for several years. We had a lot of mutual friends. And I happened to go to Kansas City for a group show. And he found out that I was coming out there and asked me to come and visit the museum. And when we went there, he said, I'd love to do a project with you. Do you have any ideas? And I had a bunch of ideas, but somewhere along our discussion, we got sidetracked and we started talking about some photos that he saw of my yard in Los Angeles that's covered in cacti and succulents. And he said, there's this guy, Mark, in Kansas City, and he loves, he's obsessed with cactuses. And even though cacti and succulents don't grow in the region, he collects them in pots, and he has 200 or 300 of them. And every winter, right before the first freeze, he brings all 300 plants into his house. So he moves furniture around. He turns his entire basement into a grow house for these plants with, heat lamps. And he was, he started telling me about this guy, and I said, this guy sounds incredible. He has this like weird cactus nursery in his basement. And I said, I think he should be the subject of the show. And so he called this guy, Mark, who was completely baffled by what we were talking about. And we asked him if we could meet with him. And after having several discussions, he agreed for me to make my show at the Nerman Museum about him, someone who's a complete stranger. So I went to his house. I spent a lot of time with him. And I realized that a big part of his his life and kind of personality is about being this caretaker for these plants, nurturing them, keeping them alive. And because without his assistance, they would all die. And so in the center of the show, so let me go back a little bit. In the center of the exhibit, this large structure kind of looks like a diamond. It's actually loosely based off the silhouette of a lava lamp. Mark is a very eccentric collector, and he also has 200 or 300 lava lamps of all different sizes. And he doesn't just bring these plants indoors, but he actually creates like sets and like almost like an art installation within his home where he puts lava lamps next to the plants. Sometimes he takes photographs of the plants or of their blooms, frames them, and then sets them next to them. I mean, he really functions like an artist. And so the shape of the structure was based on a lava lamp, and it functions almost like a terrarium. So you can, inside, you can see the front facade is covered with a piece of clear plexi. And inside there's a series of succulents. He's kind of dangling, they kind of look like wind chimes. They were also based on the photographs I took in his house. And then at the center is a large painting of him. That's a portrait of Mark. And when I was meeting with him, he was getting close to retiring. And, you know, I remember during our interviews and meeting that he said that his dream is to move to Arizona and to have a large cactus garden outdoors where he could finally have large plants. And so this portrait of him is a portrait of him in his dream cactus garden. And also one thing I should mention is within this exhibit, there was maybe 40 to 50 plants, cactuses, and various succulents, and they all belonged to Mark. So through the process of meeting him, I convinced him to also let me borrow these plants, and that, you know, that we would take care of them and keep them alive, and, you know, that they wouldn't die during the 3-course exhibit. So none of this was planned. It was all through chance happening. And kind of, you know, as I met him and talked to him, one thing led to another. And, you know, the show kind of revealed itself. And that's kind of how I work, not just in an exhibition setting, but also within the paintings themselves. So for instance, these 3 paintings are all portraits of Mark. And I had him hold, in each painting, he's holding one of his favorite plants or 2 of his favorite plants. And then as I was walking through his home, I noticed these beautiful pillows with kind of psychedelic patterns, like of mushrooms and of like these kind of like hippie flowers. And I asked him what those were. And he told me that his mother did a lot of needlepoint, and that she was in a senior living facility now, but he collected all of these pillows that he made during his youth. So strewn around the entire show are various needlepoint pillows. You can see one in the bottom right corner that I purchased on eBay, and kind of there's all these pillows that follow you all throughout the show. And then on these pedestals, on each pedestal or shelf on the wall, there's a grow light on like a desk lamp. And the color is functional. That's just the color of the natural grow lights. And then the cords connecting the lamps to the outlets throughout the show. This is another piece in the show that was quite large. This is 20 feet long by 10 feet tall. And it was the first time I worked with textiles or fibers of real, you know, like real textiles. And when I was in Mark's home, we were chatting, and he started telling me about his father and how his father had passed away. And I asked him if he had kept any of his father's belongings. And he mentioned that during his entire childhood, his father was kind of this like Midwestern fashionista, and he would collect and wear these Coogee sweaters. And he said that he remembers being a little kid and like his dad picking him up and him gripping these sweaters and feeling the texture And when his father passed away, he decided to keep some of these sweaters, and every once in a while he'll pull them out and actually like wear them as a way to kind of reminiscing about his father, but also like, it makes him feel closer to his father. So when he said this to me, I started thinking about the pillows that belong to the mother. And I realized that, parents, for most of us, parents are a set, a mother or father. And also, I was trying to tie some sort of correlation between the two things. And I thought, oh, well, what's something that's a set with a pillow? And I thought, oh, like a blanket, a quilt. So I started making this large kind of quilt, and it's just made by cutting the sweaters open and sewing the pieces together. So the holes you see are just the neck holes from the sweater. And I realized halfway through the process was that it tied into the show perfectly, because a pillow and a blanket or a quilt are two things that we use to take care of ourselves. When we sleep, we are at our most vulnerable moments, our eyes are closed, and a pillow and a blanket provides shelter and comfort. And so I realized that the parents are also our caretakers, obviously. And so for me, this is just like an example of how like one thing kind of leads to another. And the show kind of comes together through this process of me talking to the subject. I'll just go through some other photos real quick of the installation. So I'm about to show you some pictures of how most of the paintings are made. So this is the finished painting. And you can see it's very like obsessive, lots of dots. All of my work is like very, very labor intensive. And you can kind of see like, there's probably like a couple of 100,000 dots and dashes in this painting. So this is the original photograph, the source material. So this is what I started with. And as you can see some of his plants in his basement. And then this would be the Photoshop mock-up that I would make. And then we're going in reverse. And then that's the final painting. So there's a lot of editing, and the digital mock-up is really just like for compositional purposes. And then I add and manipulate and edit as I go along. Here's another painting from the show. So after that show, I was invited to do an exhibit at the Schneider Museum. And for this show, I started thinking about like different people that I wanted to make a show about, or a group of people. And at that time, I had a Henry Rousseau catalog on my nightstand that I was just casually flipping through. And I had this book for about 15 years, but I'd never really read it. I just looked at the paintings. And so I started reading the biography section, and I realized that Henry Rousseau has this incredible life story of being arrested for fraud, for gambling, for lying. He was a pathological liar. He was a failed playwright. He was simultaneously adored by the Academy and by famous artists like Picasso, but also ridiculed because he wasn't formally trained. So he had this really fascinating life. And so I decided, oh, he could be my next subject. It would be interesting to do a series of works that were essentially portraits of someone who is dead, I'd never met, and was like an important historical figure within art. And so while I was reading about him, I found out that all of Henry Rousseau's famous, all of his famous paintings of jungles were fictitious paintings. He had told people that he had been in the French military and he had gone to the jungles and rainforests of Mexico, and that's where he had discovered these epic battles between the natives and beasts. But it was completely fake. And when he died, they found a pile of ticket stubs in his home to the local botanical garden. And they'd realized he was never in the military. He had never left Paris. He had never traveled the world. And these paintings were complete fiction. So what really he was doing was appropriating, imagery that he found in books and magazines and at the local botanical gardens and making completely fictitious paintings, which I think is interesting because it's a very contemporary way of working, except he was doing it, you know, almost 100 years ago. And he was obsessed with travel. In a lot of his paintings, you would see a blimp or an airplane or a hot air balloon in the sky, sometimes in the same painting, all three objects. So I started creating these narratives of myself, of his life. So in this painting, there's this curtain being pulled back, representing like a theater curtain or a stage curtain. As I mentioned, he's a failed playwright. And in the center is this crashed blimp in the jungle. So I imagined that he would, in his mind, he was taking this blimp to this far off land, and then he would crash, and then that's when these fantastic images in his paintings would you know, come alive. He also has this unfinished portrait of himself standing next to these boats, and in the boats, the flags are signal, like code nautical flags that spell out different words. And so on the painting on the right, the flags spell out unknown voyage. And in that same painting, he had this palette. He was holding this palette that had his wife's name written on it. So in my painting, I changed the text to my wife's name. And so for me, this is a portrait of Rousseau, but it also talks about the unknown voyage of being an artist, right? Of having, obviously he had a lot of self-doubt, and I think that was a big part of his work. You know, he was always overcompensating because he wasn't academically trained, and I think most artists can kind of relate to that. You know, lack of bouts of having low self-esteem or confidence in your work, or second guessing your work. And then one thing to mention about this exhibit, the background. I was thinking, well, if I was Rousseau today, how would I like come up with my pictures? And obviously, I would use the internet instead of going to the botanical garden, because that would be the easiest way. So I went into Google and I just typed in Mexican jungle, and the first 5 images that turned up in Google Images, I just grabbed. And I created this seamless background, this panoramic background of a jungle. So, but the way Google works, Google doesn't pull, just because you search Mexican jungle doesn't mean that the images are all of Mexico. So these are actually 5 different jungles in different parts of the world. I believe none of them are actually in Mexico, just due to the way the algorithm works. So it looks like it's one place, but it's actually 5 different places. And just so it the background of the wall graphic in the background of this show functions the same way that Rousseau's paintings do. It looks like reality, but once you start looking closely, that reality falls apart. So this is a show in Dubai, and this show is called Almost Home. And this show was it's about the idea of home as a place of origin as well as a domestic space. And Dubai is one of my favorite places to go. I've been exhibiting there since 2005. And it's the only place I've ever been to where I felt culturally invisible. And what I mean by that is, in America, I always feel that I'm American, but American light, you know? So people constantly ask me where I was born, where I'm really from. You know, when I tell them I'm from Fairfax, Virginia, they kind of lean in and say, no, where are you really from? And what they really mean is you look Middle Eastern, or you look like, you don't look white, essentially. So what's your nationality? But Dubai, because nobody is from Dubai, really, the local population is the minority there. They're only 15% of the population. And they have a large Iranian population there. It's one of the first places I'd ever been to where I felt completely invisible, in the best sense of the term. So I just blended in. No one asked me where I was from, and I felt completely at ease. And so I I started thinking about some other Iranian Americans that I know living in the States and how they also felt isolated, because if we all go to Iran, we're going to be seen as American, but in America, we're also seen as the other. So we're kind of in this cultural limbo. And so I thought it would be interesting to do a series of portraits of Iranian Americans and take those portraits to Dubai. So even if they can't go to Dubai, they can also, you know, like their portraits can kind of go there for them and have, you know, go to this place where it's kind of like neutral ground, where you're not being questioned about, you know, your background constantly and where you're really from. And so in the show, there's this Farsi writing in the background. I speak Farsi, but I don't read or write it because I moved here when I was 4, or I moved out of Iran when I was 4. So I used the free software online, and I hired someone to, I used Google Translate to translate the lyrics of the Simon and Garfunkel song Homeward Bound, which based on a very unscientific Google post, I determined was the most American song about going back home, just via my friends. And so the text is, I used Google Translate to translate it into Farsi, and then I hired a Iranian calligrapher to write it out for me. And so what's interesting about the wall text is that if you read and write Farsi, the words make sense, you know, but it's kind of like broken English, you know, when you read it out, it's broken Farsi. So a lot of Iranians came and they were like, man, you really messed up the writing. Like, is this some sort of like weird, fucked up poem? And I said, no, you know, I explained to them that I use Google Translate. And the thing about Google Translate is that it translates things, but because of technology not being perfect, it doesn't really translate it accurately. So it just, half of it just sounds like gibberish. And so things literally get lost in translation. And for me, you know, that's like a metaphor kind of for being kind of this like cultural hybrid. You know, when I speak Farsi, but a lot of like cultural things kind of go over my head because I didn't really grow up there. And so Google, this broken text about going back home becomes the symbol of not really being in either one place. It's like, it's not really English, it's not really Farsi, it's something in between. And there's a lot of, it's problematic and complex. I'll just go through these real fast. So now we're jumping to 2017. So this is like right after the election, and I had just traveled overseas, and I went to Israel for an exhibit. And when I was there at the airport, because I'm not Jewish, and I wasn't born in Israel, and obviously on my passport it says I was born in Iran, I was interrogated 4 hours going in to Israel. I was interrogated 2 hours leaving Israel. And just because my passport said I was in Iran. And I remember leaving, you know, I had a great time in the city, but when I was, you know, at the airport, you know, it was like I had like a lot of, you know, just issues. And I remember getting on the plane thinking, thank God I'm going back to America where I don't have to deal with like kind of this like very militaristic experience of flying. And so I get on the plane, you know, 20 hours later, I land in New Jersey where I had to transfer planes. And I believe the date was January 26th. And when I get there, I go to the TSA guy, and he looks at he's like, yo, you were in Tel Aviv? And I go, yeah. And he's like, and you were born in Iran? I go, that's what the passport says. And the guy says, you know, follow me, takes me to this Homeland Security guy. And he's like, asks me the same questions. And then eventually they take me into the basement of the airport, and I'm kept in a room with like 80 other people of all various brown complexions, from like light skinned, you know, Asians to Nigerians to Iranians, you know, some old people in wheelchairs, and almost everybody had a US passport in their hand. They take all our passports away and they just kind of hold us for hours and hours with no explanation. And it's, you know, it's not TSA anymore. So it's like guys with machine guns. And, you know, honestly, it was scary. It was, you know, we couldn't get on our phones. I missed my flight, and without any explanation, I was released and had to figure out how to get back to LA. And when I got back to LA, there was protests at the airport, and I was completely confused. I'm like, is this for me? Like, what the hell's going on? And I realized that was the first day of Trump's flight ban, which was all to Muslim countries. And so after that experience, I had a show planned for later that year in LA, but between the election and my experience of traveling and also becoming a father, you know, my son was maybe about 1.5 years at that point, I started thinking about what it really means to be American, and how a lot of times I feel like a stranger in my home. So this exhibit is called A Stranger in Your Own Home. And it's kind of like it's a play on words. So you know, you're not really sure if me as the artist, I'm saying I feel like a stranger in my home, or if there's, you know, quote unquote, real Americans saying there's a stranger in our home, as in I am the stranger. And so for this show, there were several components. There was this installation in the center. So this house-like, almost like a small chapel. And when you go inside, there's a stained glass portrait of myself. There's a better view of the stained glass. And this is a kind of like a Madonna and Child portrait, and it's me holding the sock monkey. And the sock monkey is a placeholder for my son. So my nickname for my son is Monkey, because he's always climbing on me. But also the sock monkey was a toy that a friend gave to us when he was first born. It's one of his favorite toys. And also for me, a sock monkey is a symbol of Americana. To me, it's like a very humble, old American toy. You know, when I think about American toys, this is one of the first things that I think of. And so when you enter the structure, there's a sound piece. There's a bench. You can't see it in the photo because it's all black, but there's a bench in there, like almost like a pew. And you face this stained glass, and you hear a 30-minute recording. That's a conversation between my parents and I, and it's about their experience of coming to America. And you know, we had a very tumultuous experience of coming to America. We lived middle class in Iran, and we left shortly after the revolution, and we were stranded in Turkey. You know, we were so poor, we couldn't afford a refrigerator in Turkey. You know, my parents ate nothing but bread and cheese for like 6 months. And a lot of these stories I didn't really know because I was so young. And so this was the first time in, you know, 30 something years that I actually sat down with my parents and asked them about our journey to America. And I had this very faint memory of my parents. We used to have roommates because we couldn't afford a place by ourselves, and we had these 2 young women that we roomed with, and one day we just abruptly moved out. And I had this faint memory of them being like my parents finding out that they were prostitutes, and I thought that couldn't possibly be true, and I'd never asked my parents about it. And then so in this discussion that you hear, my parents say, yes, that's true. So what I did in the recording was I interviewed my parents separately, and then I spliced it together. So a lot of times throughout this discussion, you'll hear my parents not remembering correctly the facts, or like saying things that didn't really line up. So the whole discussion is really fuzzy. And at the end of the sound piece, you know, the last question I ask my mom is, you know, do you have any regrets about leaving like family and loved ones behind in Iran, and like having to restart your life 3 times and moving to America with $70 in your pocket? And, you know, she said, you know, it was very tough for us to restart our lives. And, but it was all worth it because now we're in America, we feel safe. you know, we're successful, your dad has a good business, and best of all, you're happy and healthy, you got a good education, and now you're married, and you know, you gave us a grandson, and he's going to be able to grow up in America and not ever have to worry about any of these things. So really this piece was really an homage to all the struggles that my parents went through, but also, you know, I thought about the recording component of the piece as a as one book in a series of books in my family story. And then, you know, I thought of the stained glass as perhaps the cover of the second book, you know, the second stage of our lives, where my son, you know, he doesn't have to go through a lot of the things that, you know, the struggles that, you know, my family went through to kind of get here. And then throughout the show, there's a series of portraits of other American immigrants from all walks of life. So from Colombia, Russia, Korea. And at the beginning of the exhibit, there's another sound piece. So when you first walk into the show, you hear this discussion, a round table. It sounds like a round table discussion of these 8 different immigrants talking about what it means to be an American, the good, the bad, you know, the confusing. And it sounds like a round table discussion, but I actually recorded them separately and then took my voice out and spliced it all together. So it just sounds like this like ongoing debate about what it means to be an American. And then when you walk past the door, you hear these interviews. And then once you get into the main part of the exhibit, you're kind of left looking at these kind of veiled figures where you can't tell their race or identity, or if they're male or female. And you have to try to connect the voices that you heard with the image. So the audio piece and the way the show was installed is also kind of pushing back where you can't see the things that you usually associate with a portrait. So right after that, I did this. This is a show at Denny Dimon Gallery in New York, and the paint. It's part of the same body of work from A Stranger in Your Home. This show's called How Far We've Come. And I went back to Google Translate again, and I picked the lyrics to Neil Diamond's America, which again is like a very iconic song. And that song is really about immigration and about how incredible America is, and how we open our arms to America, to immigrants. And you know, the song's about like immigrants coming here on boats, and you know, they're coming to America, and the chorus is, they're coming to America, they're coming to America, they're coming to America, in a very joyous feeling, you know, repetition. And I thought, you know, if you take that chorus out of context, it can read very confusing in what's happening in the world right now, especially in America. So is they're coming to America, is that a cry of celebration and joy, or is it like a warning? So on the walls, it's repeated over and over again, they're coming to America. And then on top of it are these portraits of immigrants from all walks of life who have come to America for a better life. Some small paintings in the show. And a lot of these paintings are, some of them are of multiracial families. This is a Mexican/Filipino family that lives near me. Some details. I got about 20 more minutes, correct?
Yeah, we want to keep some time at the end for questions.
Okay. So I'll go pretty quick. Yeah, I'll just fly through these. And I'll share a couple of murals. This is at Mocha Tucson. I believe it's still up. I come from a mural background, and I'd always wanted to work large and outdoors again. And And I'd been doing these botanical paintings that reference a lot of things from like Dutch and Flemish still lifes from the Golden Age. And I'm also interested in plant life because plants, for me, a lot of times in a lot of the paintings, they're placeholders for people, but also they're really, plants for me are really interesting because in going to many different people's homes, I've realized that plants are a constant in everyone's homes. I think it's a way that we connect to the natural world, and we bring the natural world in a pot or in our yards, and we try to control it. So these paintings are always very chaotic, the plants in them, and also the plant life in all these murals and in the paintings are from all over the world. So you'll see a cactus next to a succulent. You know, you'll see an orchid next to, you know, a rose. You know, yeah. And for me, I'm also interested in plants because plants migrate just like people, and they migrate two different ways. They migrate by people carrying them from point A to point B, or they migrate on birds. You know, there's this rich history of animals and birds kind of migrating seeds, you know, on their bodies, and then you'll find this plant, you know, 600 miles away from where it originates. This one was at the Museum of Art and History in Lancaster, and this is one in Los Angeles. I think it just recently got painted over. This is an interior mural. This has the heart shape, the key lock in the center, and the bird cage on the right-hand side are all reliefs that are painted on wood that kind of comes off the wall. And then the last exhibit is, this is a survey of my work that was at MoCA Tucson. It opened in January and it was supposed to go to May, but got shut down early because of COVID. And it just spans my work from 2012 to 2019. And then this is just some recent work just made in the last 6 to 8 months. So I started, you know, I'm still doing these kind of veiled portraits, but I started creating these paintings where there was paintings within paintings. So these vignettes of smaller images. And I used to publish a magazine, an art and design magazine called Beautiful Decay, and I used to do the layout. And when I thought about making these paintings that have multiple paintings with them, I went and looked at the way magazines and newspapers and books are laid out. So they use a grid format and to create a hierarchy of images. So, you know, if you go to a newspaper, there's a headline, the title of the publication, a headline, an image credit, you know, maybe a quote, and then the main article, and then maybe like a little teaser of the next article. So I started using those that same kind of framework to create these new paintings. So you'll have the main, like in this one, the main event in the center, but then these smaller images that relate to it. And I'm a maximalist in every sense of the word when it comes to art. So for me, this was a way to insert 20 paintings within one painting, which for me is just on a very selfish level is very satisfying. But also I'm interested in quoting different ways of image making. So having areas that are very flat and graphic and cartoony next to something that's more rendered, next to something that's taken from a vintage lithograph, and referencing also high and low. So pop, you know, these smiley faces that are very like pop culture next to an ancient manuscript, next to antiquity, and kind of creating these hybrid high and low coded narrative paintings. Another new one. And so what I'm showing you now, I haven't exhibited yet. It was supposed to be, the last couple of images are just from an upcoming show in May. So recently I've kind of taken that same idea of these paintings within paintings, and I've actually removed the veiled figures altogether. And now I'm using only source image, different graphics from children's books, art historical catalogs, clip art, things that I photograph, and kind of creating these paintings that don't have, like for instance, this whole series is, I kind of think of them as self-portraits, although they don't have any images of me. So it's kind of pushing the idea of what a portrait can be. Does a portrait have to have an image of the person that it's portraying, or is portrait more of a way of thinking about something, or like an alternative way of describing someone or something? Here's another one. And I think that's it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amir. That was an amazing presentation.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Already have a couple of questions. So I'll scroll through those. If everybody else wants to take a moment and think of any other questions, you can type them in the chat and I'll get to them.
Should I get out of the sharing, or
Go ahead.
I have to? Yeah. Okay.
Whatever you're more comfortable with.
Okay. Or maybe I'll just leave it up in case anybody has a question about something specific, and I'll scroll back into it.
Awesome. That sounds like a good idea. Okay, so our first question comes from Dory. She says, I noticed and I'm curious about the recurring diagonal pipe-like interruptions or flow lines running through your paintings.
Sure. So here, you can kind of see these big kind of X-like lines, and then the three color gradients. So initially, when I first started doing these portraits, I was looking at a lot of Persian miniature painting and kind of reading about it. And I came across this like little description, which I can't even find it again. It was so long ago, but they talked about these decorative borders on Persian miniatures as literal windows into the imagery. So for instance, like this border kind of going around this painting, with these ancient manuscripts, that the artists wanted the viewers to literally jump into the story or the narrative that they were depicting and like live through the image. And I thought, what a fantastic way to talk about portraiture. So or picture making. So I started incorporating that idea into my work, and yeah, so it started very simply like that, and then through time, trying to see if I can find one. So through just the process of making paintings, I got bored with these borders just going around the edges of the paintings, and as you can see in this one, they started weaving in and out of the picture plane. So they went from being just these like ways of defining the edges of the painting to pushing and pulling certain parts of the painting in and out. So they became a formal element. And in a lot of them, for me, actually, I started thinking about a lot of minimal art, you know, everything from Frank Stella to Ellsworth Kelly, and my love for that work, even though it's so different than mine. And I've started, you know, so they also become this like art history reference for me. Kind of like a quiet way of kind of tipping my hat to some of that work throughout art history.
Gotcha. Thank you. And then we have a question from Amy. How long did it take you to create the Caretaker from concept to completion? It's an amazing work and installation.
That, you know, I didn't get a lot of time for that show, surprisingly. I think I had about 4 months to make all the work in the show, which now sounds crazy, but I didn't have a kid at the time. My wife was pregnant, so all I did was paint 24/7. And then the install itself took about 2 weeks of on-site install. So that large structure, I hand painted that whole thing by myself, like all those kind of like that faux wood pattern. It was intense, but it didn't take as long as it looks like it did. I mean, I had 6 different people helping me with the on-site install. And then in the studio, I had several people helping me with, like, I had someone sewing that large quilt piece. And, you know, I just had people helping me with the various parts of it. So the museum was very supportive in making the show a reality. So it was a great experience.
Awesome, thank you. Our next question's from Kevin. He says, thank you, Amir. I really appreciate your approach to portraiture and identity, and I'm curious, are there any thinkers or theorists who have been helpful in thinking through the questions you address in your work?
You know, honestly, I can't say I read too much theory. You know, I kind of, once I was done with grad school, I was like, you know, 8 years of theory, deep dive on theories enough. So no, I mean, honestly, no, there isn't anybody that comes to mind that I'm thinking about. I mean, one thing that all of my work, even like the Henry Rousseau installation or the Caretaker, all of my work starts from a very personal place for me. So I'll have some sort of experience, or something will happen in my life that will lead me down a path, and I'm just a naturally very curious person, and I might read things based on what I stumble across. But like I said, a lot of it just happens by chance. So, you know, I was looking at paintings by Henry Rousseau without ever reading anything about him. One day I just got curious and I started reading, and that led to a show. Or the show at the Nerman Museum only happened because I was talking to the director and he started mentioning a friend of his. So that process has kind of worked thus far, and that's kind of how all the show comes. So like the work I'm making right now, these works, they came to me because I was reading children's stories, you know, to my son every night for the last 5 years. And I realized that these stories are very simple ways that parents pass on life lessons or their morals or their belief systems to their kids. And so every painting is based on a line of text that's actually kind of hidden in the paintings. You can kind of see, you guys see where my arrow is? It says empathy here. It says empathy even for those who do not speak. This an entire body of work came from me just reading to my son at night. Or this painting is called No Gods, No Masters. So my process is very organic. I don't know if that answers the question.
Definitely very insightful. Maybe not theory, but children's books can be theory. I mean,
yeah, I mean, no, there's not like some theorist that I like read over again. I can't, you know.
Right. Our next question comes from Zafi. They say, your work is so heavily patterned. Is it all via reference, or is it ever made up?
It's both. A lot of the portraits of individuals, for instance, in this one, the figure in the center, the figure on the right, that kind of floral pattern is from like a 1960s couch that they have in their living room. And the pattern, the red and white pattern on the left, is from a pillow that was on that same couch. And it's pretty true to what they actually look like. And then sometimes, like let's say I'll go on to paint somebody and they don't have anything patterned in their home. So for instance, in this one, this figure, he had nothing with a pattern in his house, but we started talking. He's Vietnamese, and he started telling me about his family origin. And he started telling me that, you know, his ancestors he's a descendant of a Chinese emperor. And I was like, that's interesting. So I looked up the emperor and I found this old drawing, where this emperor is wearing this robe with this dragon pattern. So that dragon pattern was made into the fabric that's covering him. And then sometimes I do make stuff up, but it's usually based on some sort of discussion or something I see in their house, and I might just add to it or accentuate it in some capacity.
Awesome. So it looks like we're nearing the end of our time, but we have time for one more question. So this comes from a different Kevin from before. They say, you mentioned how the paintings become chapters that tell a bigger story. Could you talk about the process of how you organize the overall body of work in an installation to tell a story?
The overall body of work. So I'm just wondering if that's like within one installation, or can you read that last part one more time?
Mm-hmm. Could you talk about the process of how you organize the overall body of work in an installation to tell a story?
You know, when I did the survey show at Mocha Tucson, so that was the overall body of work. So it had work from several different series. The way the show flowed wasn't very narrative. You know, it was more about just how the works worked on one another. But with the Caretaker in that show, the install was very specific. So when you first walked in, you know, you walked in seeing this large kind of terrarium piece. And so there was a flow to it, but I think, you know, my works are narrative, but it's not a cohesive, like there's no like beginning, middle, and end to any of the paintings. So I think the installs kind of reflect that. So there's some sort of flow, but I think a lot of times that the way the exhibitions flow is more of like for formal concerns, like sight lines and how two pieces look next to one another. But yeah.
Gotcha. All right. And it looks like we are just out of time. So I'm going to conclude our program today. Thank you everybody for attending this week's Visiting Artist Program lecture with Amir. We hope that you enjoyed today's lecture and we look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you so much, Amir. That was amazing.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.